Hey guys, I am just going to wait for confirmation that this is playing and that we have sound. So if you can hear me, just let me know and we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, testing. Go ahead and get started. All right, we have sound. Okay. All right, so a few things before we get started. First, a mea culpa. So Janice, who is my ride or die, and she's the main one that I like throw theories out to and stuff. We had a miscommunication about the video with Zulema being interviewed. So I was talking about the person who was helping her, and she thought that the detective sitting next to Detective Hermosillo was the one who was talking, saying, hey, maybe she was talking about the move to Hawaii and stuff. And I thought it was the gentleman sitting next to Zulema. So we were talking in two parallel universes. And it was after the live, for some reason, I asked her about the spelling of Kaikamanu because she told me how to pronounce that crazy name. And she sent me a screenshot of his, I don't know if his current Facebook profile pic or whatever, but it was just the back of his head and he had brown hair. And I was like, oh no. And so I reviewed the video. I could see the video better because I was on a large iMac and she was on a phone. And at that time, the gentleman sitting next to Zulema, who I didn't recognize because I didn't, well, anyway, he was, I think, Garrett Smith, who is Zulema's attorney. So it was not Detective Kaikamanu who was helping Zulema with this crazy calendar. That was her attorney, which that's his job. And I think the other reason why I thought that it made sense that it was a detective was that Detective Hermosillo said, well, maybe, and he went with it. So I thought maybe this was two detectives not wanting to step on each other's toes. I think that Detective Hermosillo was trying to give Zulema a heads up, like basically, you are going to be killed on cross because there are these contradictions. So all that to say, that is ultimately it falls on me to verify all the information that goes into these lives. And I was really torn up over it because I go to such great lengths to try to verify everything and and say I think that this is whatever. Anyway, so that was on me. My apologies to Detective Kaikamanu. No one ever said anything to me about it. This is just we just want to be as accurate as possible. There's always room especially in these FOIA docs, for conjecture. I just always try to state that. But anyway, the other thing is starting with the next live. We are going to start a series, which I alluded to in my last live, where we are going to go through the timeline. We are going to start in 2018, and we are going to go to, as late as the timeline takes us, and systematically pick apart this timeline, because I think that there's a lot of information that's kind of hidden in the timeline. And I think that when you go systematically, take a literal timeline approach, it really helps you to capture the gravitas of the timing of some of these players' activities, especially July, September, and October. So so starting next week, we are going to do that. I want to keep those lives a little shorter because, I am going to try to do every week, like health, energy, cooperating, but these lives get a little long. So what I'm not going to do in those lives, at least not in the beginning, and yeah, I just try to stay as flexible as possible, but I'm going to leave the Q&A out of the live. So the Q&A is really kind of my guilty pleasure, because that's when I get to, kind of connect with you guys. But at the same time, there's a lot of lost efficiency in the Q&A, because we get to the end of the live and it's just not realistic. It's too difficult to find questions, even though I'm like, put question in all caps and stuff. There's a lot of time just kind of wasted scrolling, looking for questions. So if you have questions, I highly encourage you to drop them in the comments, not in the live. I mean, you're certainly more than welcome to, drop them in the live, and my amazing moderators, they know this case so well, they can answer a lot of these questions. But if it's a question that you specifically have for me, because I can't reply to questions, so if I'm not doing the Q&A, I can't reply to the questions in the live. And I do review the transcripts. It's just very cool just to see the sense of community and the interactions. And sometimes it's hilarious. Sometimes people make points where I'm like, whoa, okay, I need to add that to the timeline, or, whatever, or the next live. But if I can't respond to those, in a written way. So if you have questions, I will do a Q&A after this live, but when we get to the timeline lives, if you have questions, just drop them in the comments for the video. I do review those comments. Sometimes it might take, a few days, a week, or, just depending on my schedule. And my amazing moderators do review them first, just to, get rid of all the Karen comments, which at times, yeah, before I had them review the questions, at times it just got so ridiculous, and we were getting a lot of trolls. So we wanted to send a message. Listen, if you're trolling this channel, you're going to be wasting your time, because I'm not going to see your troll comments. So, okay, without further ado, this one, well, I guess a little bit more ado. One thing I will say about this live, and I don't want to oversell it, but I think I can accurately say this is the only live where I've felt like kind of excited about, because a lot of times these lives, they have elements that are really heavy lift, and there always will be. I mean, this is a really heavy, dark story. But with this particular live, in preparing for the last live, there were several points in looking at some of this GPS data that I just thought, whoa, I think that this answers some long-standing questions I've had about this case. Now, I will just make a blanket disclaimer from the beginning. Again, I have no training in law enforcement. I have no training in how to interpret these GPS maps, but I am an analyst and I do a lot with data visualization. And so I will explain my process. I'll explain my my theories and what I think that some of these symbols mean and things like that. And then, you're free to make your own conclusions. But okay, now without further ado, let's jump into the live. So I am going to share my screen. Okay, I'm just waiting for confirmation that this is sharing my screen. Okay, great. As always, if you haven't signed this petition, and if you're so inclined, this is not an accurate number. We are pretty close to 10,000 signatures. And so you can just go to BIT, like you can enter into your browser on your phone or a computer, bit.ly, and then this Justice for Joe without most of the vowels except for the E in Joe. And that will take you to this to this petition, which, I just hope over the years it will just continue to grow and send a message to Phoenix that Joe's death also deserves to be investigated. Okay. All right. So the first question is, who was the mystery shopper? So I referred to this in last week's live. And there was someone who was in the Walmart, and we don't know who that person is, but I think that there's a clue. So at one point in the police report, there's this note that additionally, Melanie, they misspell Melanie. This is actually referring to Melanie Boudreaux. And this is also the legend was very low resolution, but this says MB for Melanie Boudreaux. And it said that her tower was shown in pink, and so you see the pink in the legend. We also saw where Lori's is indicated by red. The color is a little off in one of the screenshots that was in the report. In another one, it looked like a true red. Excuse me. But I thought that this was interesting, that blue is indicated as BB. And the only BB in this case is Brandon Boudreaux. So I think that Brandon's color was blue. Now, do I think that they were actually tracking Brandon? Initially, I thought, well, maybe they just combined the GPS data for all of their different devices across these different cases. And that still may be the case. But the fact still stands that Brandon is indicated by the color blue. Okay, so, all right. Now let's take a second look at the device at the Walmart. So this is indicating, this was on September 26th, which was the same day that Melanie Boudreaux, at that time Boudreaux, flew into Rexburg. Now, some of this information, it is going to be predicated on the information that I shared in the last live. So I try to not tether one live to another, but in the interest of time, I'm going to have to. So if you haven't seen last week's live, you will want to review that. If you want to jump to a particular point in the video, I almost always, in the description, I will share minute marks and what they point to. And those minute marks become live links on mobile or desktop. And if you click or tap on one of those, it will take you to that point in the video. So if in the description, if you see 3:56, and you click on that or tap on it on a mobile device, that will fast forward the video to the 3 minute and 56-second mark. So that's how you can, kind of tap around to preview things or to review something without watching the entire video. And I specifically, with that particular live, I added more links than I normally do. So I talked about how they were tracking the activity of one of these devices on the day that Melanie flew in. And this was pretty late at night. This was like 9:52 to 10:16, I think. Yeah. And but what we didn't know what I didn't share at that time was why. So looking at a bunch of these different maps, I was like, why is it that with some of these, and most of the dots are indicated by what you'll see in this particular map, you'll see these little dots. So most of them are indicated by these dots, but sometimes you see what looks like a Wi-Fi symbol. And that's what you see in the Walmart. So this person, I believe, was walking around. So this was, I believe, a device that was registered to Brandon Boudreaux, but instead of it indicating cell activity, I think the person was logged in to their Wi-Fi. Like they were accessing the internet via Wi-Fi. And if you hear a dog growling in the background, that's my daughter's dog. Um, but he's a Yorkie, but he thinks he's like, yeah, a really big dog. Anyway, so where am I going with this? Brandon's device was also at one point, it showed up at Alex's apartment. So this LV, Lori was the color red. This is indicating this is Lori's apartment, and Alex's apartment was just to the right of Lori's. And I mentioned this last week, but this latitude and longitude, it actually pointed to Alex's apartment. And it was actually just like 10 feet off. In fact, when I put in the walking directions, it was like, okay, just walk 10 feet. I think it was just north of his apartment. So, sometimes with this cell data or this GPS data, it gets really close. Like kind of astonishingly close, but not exact, and kind of tuck that little piece of information away because I believe that will become relevant again. So what is my theory? And I just decided I'm just going to use the same image anytime I talk about theory. This goes back to Cagney and Lacey. It was a show that I absolutely loved from the 80s. And anyway, so my theory is that when Melanie went to Rexburg to visit Lori, she brought an iPad that was registered to Brandon. And I have an iPad. And when you have an iPad or some kind of tablet, but when you have a tablet, you can either decide to pay for a data plan for it or just get one that, the only way you're going to be able to access the internet is via Wi-Fi. And so I think that's why these dots, instead of being little blue dots, they're little blue Wi-Fi symbols. So I think that my theory is that when Melanie flew to Rexburg, she brought a device that was registered to Brandon. And when they went to the Walmart that night, she had the iPad with her, or, some kind of device. It could also have been like an old iPhone that they're not paying for data for anymore, but they just use it for Wi-Fi. But typically it's going to be like an iPad or something. And I think that is why in some of these maps, you'll see this blue, and it's only blue, will use a Wi-Fi symbol. Okay. Oops. All right. And yeah, so I think the mystery shopper was Melanie Boudreaux, now Melanie Pawlowski. All right. Now, does that mean that it's guaranteed? No, but I think we will find out the answers to these questions for sure in one of these trials that we have ahead of us. Okay, second question. How did Kay find out Lori moved to Rexburg? All right, so a little bit of background. On September 26th, Kay sent this email to Detective Moffat from Chandler Police. And she said, "Hi, Nathan, quick note. Brandon Boudreaux's oldest son said Lori moved out of state. I think the boy is 11, maybe 12 years old. Nicole sent an IM this evening to let me know. What now? If it's true, how does it affect the case? I was about to retain Arizona attorney for visitation. I guess I'll put brakes on that until I know more. This has substantially heightened my concern for JJ's well-being. How can you find out if it's true? When can you find out? It could possibly be a ploy for whatever crazy reason she thinks of. Please call when you can tomorrow." So this has always been a mystery. Like, how did she find out? How did Brandon Boudreaux's oldest son find out that Lori moved out of state? Well, then another piece to the puzzle was this video, this interview that she did for 2020. I know that I was interviewed for 2020 in February of 2020, but it didn't air because of the pandemic. It didn't air until February of 2021. So like some of the information that they included in the final copy. It was just weird because I was like, well, we know that that didn't happen, so why are you including this? I just have not been impressed with 2020. However, I will play this part of the video because this has been just a mystery for me. Okay.
You were in communication with police and investigators because you wanted to find JJ and Tylee.
In September, I believe we learned that they moved to Idaho, but I still didn't have an apartment.
Okay, so the sound isn't very good in this, but she had said that in September, they found out that Lori and the kids had moved to Idaho, but they just didn't have an apartment number. So that would mean she knew that they were living in Rexburg, Idaho, but didn't have an apartment number. So I wondered even back then if this could have been because of some kind of GPS data, because GPS will, like I said, it will take you close, but it won't necessarily, give you the exact spot. But if this was an iPad or any kind of Apple device, and I'm sure Google has something equivalent, I'm just not an Android user, but you can use the Find My app and track where a device is. And so anyway, okay, let me move on. I haven't gotten to the theory yet. I just need to move to the next slide. Okay, so by way of reminder, September 26th was also the day that Melanie flew from Mesa into Idaho Falls, and then was somewhere in Rexburg. It's safe to assume that evening. So, and then this is being kind of slow. So my theory is that Brandon, if this was an iPad, he could have used the Find My app to track the device. And the whole time Melanie was there, she could have been taking screenshots, taking video. We don't know anything that she would have saved to that iPad, depending on how they had things set up in iCloud, would be backed up in iCloud. So my theory is that something happened, like maybe Melanie took pictures in Lori's apartment, and Brandon or Brandon's son, someone was able to see, wait a minute, that's Lori's furniture. But somehow I believe that they were tracking the device. We also know that Melanie was tracking their movements because of a watch she had given her son. So I think that they were like tracking each other. And that is why I believe that most likely Kay was alerted by this. They had kind of this cadre of folks who were researching, and they're just trying to figure out what was going on. And I think Kay got the message, hey, Lori, it looks like Lori moved to Rexburg. I think they had the GPS coordinates that were in Rexburg, but for some reason Kay didn't pass on that it was Rexburg, just that she had moved out of state. So, and I think that's why in the 2020 interview, she said, we had their address, we just didn't have the apartment number. I mean, obviously, it still would have been plenty of information to be able to call in a welfare check. I don't say that in judgment. I'm just saying, like with Gabby Petito, they didn't even know what state she was in. When her parents called in the welfare check, they just gave them the contact info of Brian Laurie's parents because Gabby had lived with them before they went on their trip, and they were able to find her body within days. And but anyway, so that's my theory for that one. This is similar. Like And this has really mystified me because this has never come up in all the interviews they've done. It's never come up that Brandon verified that JJ was alive just days before he was murdered. Again, this I found out by just going through a lot of the email interactions. This came from the first FOIA doc that was released from Chandler. And you can see on September 17th, Kay sent an email to Detective Moffat. The subject line was Colby's address. So they were trying to track down where Charles' truck was. I don't think that Detective Moffat really cared about that. I think that was more of a family issue. And I could understand them being upset about it. Like, what was Colby doing with Charles' truck? Like, this should have gone to his, biological son. So they just couldn't figure out what happened to Charles' truck. And someone had verified that the truck was at Colby's, and she shared Colby's address, but then included also Brandon Boudreaux saw JJ and he's okay. It gives us a little relief to hear that. So this really mystified me because when I found this was in one of the FOIA docs, I think the second Chandler FOIA doc. I was like, how in all of these interviews and all of this time that we've all been following the case, how has this never come up? And I personally believe that JJ was murdered on the 22nd. There's an interview that Detective Hermosillo does with that Detective Hermosillo and Lieutenant Ball do with Melanie Gibb. And when Detective Hermosillo asked Melanie Gibb about a text that she received from Lori about putting JJ back down at 8:30 p.m. on Sunday, the 22nd, Melanie really freaks out. We'll cover this in the timeline. When we get to that point of the timeline, but she really freaks out. She shows significant signs of deception and just stress. And also then there's the question of like, well, why would she be putting him back down at 8:30? Like that was more like his bedtime. And we know that during that day, they had gone on a little field trip. All of the adults, according to David, Warwick, they had all gone to see this property, which would have meant that JJ would have been by himself. So this is a 7-year-old little boy with autism by himself, and who knows how long they were at this property. But anyway, so all that to say, I believe he was murdered on the 22nd. But this would, if I'm correct, this would have been 5 days before he was murdered. And we have no insight into how did Brandon see JJ? Well, I think that, let me see. Yeah, so this was the 17th. One thing to note, because I'm always thinking in terms of a timeline, this would have been the day that Zulema left. And I think that this could possibly be significant because of how I think that Brandon possibly verified that JJ was okay. One other piece of information before I get to my theory is I believe Melanie Boudreaux, Melanie Gibb, all of them, Zulema, I believe they all knew that the plan was for the kids to be murdered or to like die from their prayers. But the plan was always for the kids to be out of the picture. I believe that they also all knew about Tammy. But here we see Melanie gets this burner phone. And this was on, let's see. Yeah, July 19th. She gets his burner phone. And we don't know if that was the day she got the burner phone, but on July 19th, so this was just 8 days after Charles was murdered, she sends Lori an SMS, and she's not the sharpest tack in the drawer. So she identifies herself. It's Melanie Lee, my clear line. I'll use for emergencies. If you have something you want to send to this phone, text me a monkey covering his eyes emoji, and I'll know to look in this one. Very, very clever. The number linked to Melanie's, Boudreaux's secret phone was, and then they obviously redact that. And then on 7/21 at 17:25 hours, Melanie sent Lori an additional text message that read, "You should get a life insurance policy on JJ, Tylee, and you. Because after Charles, we see that anything can happen." And she missed the word if it's the Lord's will. So here she is suggesting, hey, you know what? You might want to get a life insurance policy, as if like Lori wouldn't have figured that out on her own. She had life insurance policies on JJ and Tylee. But why would Melanie be suggesting this just 10 days after Charles was murdered? I mean, she interpreted it as, well, we see anything can happen if it's the Lord's will. But so all that to say, I believe that Melanie knew all along that the kids were going to be murdered. And my theory, is I wonder if on the 17th, if Lori was having, like, let's say a FaceTime conversation with Melanie, and Zulema would have just left. And I personally believe that Zulema was involved in the planning of Brandon's death. Like, she was in the middle of all of this activity. And so I think that it's reasonable to hypothesize that Melanie may have had a conversation over FaceTime with Lori and grabbed a screenshot or a video or something, knowing that JJ wasn't going to be around much longer. But when she saved that to her device, it backed up to the cloud. And I suspect that Brandon and maybe his son was also involved. They were monitoring this iPad activity very closely. So again, I just don't see, especially because Brandon was very worried about his own safety. I don't see Brandon taking a trip out to Rexburg, to like spy on Lori and to see JJ maybe outside playing or something like that. No, again, it could have been something else, but somehow they were able to let Kay was able to say, basically, we know JJ is still alive. So my theory. The last one, who was the mystery woman in the ring footage? So what is the ring footage? I'm just going to play this. The sound is really bad, but the background behind this footage, this was released on February 22nd, 2020, I think. So it was pretty early on in the case, and Garna Mieja, she was a fantastic reporter who is no longer working as a reporter, but she had gone to Rexburg and had interviewed the neighbors and had gotten this ring doorbell footage. There was footage of JJ like running and playing with another kid, obviously before he was killed. And then there was this footage of a mystery woman who is running through the snow, and there was some kind of like igloo that was just out of view, like probably over here. And you hear Lori with this woman, they're going back and forth talking about the igloo. Pay attention to the laugh. Okay, they're just talking. The sound is really, really bad. Like, I have to use headphones, to hear what they're saying. We had a post, I think last year sometime in Cool Cats, like where we like tried to figure out what they were saying and stuff. But anyway, let me go to the next one. So I have always suspected that this mystery woman was Summer Shiflett. And I have several reasons. One, she's thin like Summer. She's a brunette like Summer. She, in my opinion, has the same laugh as Lori. When they laugh, to me, it sounds like they're laughing in stereo. And their voices are very similar. Their laughs are similar. And whoops, she has a very girly run. And she's fascinated by snow. So the Cox family, they were always warm weather people. Like they lived in California, Texas, and Arizona. So they gravitated toward warm weather. So it kind of made sense to me. Like this wouldn't have just been another resident of Rexburg, because why would they have been so fascinated by snow? Plus, Lori hadn't been there that long. This footage was grabbed on October 29th of 2019. So, again, I always suspected that it was Summer. That was my opinion. However, when I was going through the GPS data, I caught something that I hadn't noticed before. So going back to the legend, I thought it was really curious that one of the items on the legend was SS. And the only person whose name has those initials that I can think of, and I'm pretty familiar with all of the players. Again, there's all kinds of conjecture in this, but the only one I can think of is Summer Shiflett. And then there was this email exchange. Whoops. And for this particular email exchange, it starts at the bottom. And so you see that's 9 p.m. on March 6th, then 9:17 p.m., and then 9:20. So I'm going to start down here. The left blue pin is almost on top of 174, which was what became Melanie's apartment. And 175 Lori's, which are next to each other. So that isn't relevant to this. Alex's apartment, 107, was in the next row to the right, and we saw that with one of the maps, which is right about where the cluster of red and blue pins are. So again, blue is Brandon Boudreaux, which I believe is a device that Melanie would have taken. Red was Lori. But then there's this sentence. It says, in fact, his unit is 1 unit south of the one with the yellow dot at the base. And when I put in those GPS coordinates, it came up just like it came up as Alex's apartment, but it was 10 feet north of his apartment. And this one also says, in fact, his unit is 1 unit south of the one with the yellow dot at the base. Yellow indicates Summer Shiflett. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of conjecture in this, but I do think that it is reasonable given, and I include whoops, let me go back to this one. Let me hide this. I include a link to the tweet. It's just bit.ly/peekaboo -camera if you want to review the footage yourself. But I think given the, all of the other details that I've shared, and then the fact that this note here puts the yellow dot, and this was a dot, it wasn't like the Wi-Fi device. So I believe this would have been like from cell data, but it puts Summer Shiflett at Alex's apartment at some point in the midst of this whole story. Now, there's no indicator of what date that is, so I'm just trying to be as transparent as possible in, what this information could mean. But I personally believe that Summer was there this was on October 29th. We also know that Melanie signed her lease for her apartment on October 28th. So it could be that when Melanie flew out to Rexburg, so we know that she was there in September after both Tylee and JJ were gone. I talked about that in the last live, but then she must have flown back again in late October, because then we know that she flew back to Arizona with Alex and then packed up the house. And this was on October 31st. So this was Halloween. They stayed at Zulema's. I talked about that in the last live. But I actually wonder if perhaps Summer flew out with Melanie when she came out. And if so, she would be one more person who was at Lori's when the kids were so obviously not there. And if you look at that video footage again, if this is Summer, she's not showing a care in the world. It's not, I just don't think it would be reasonable to say, like, well, maybe she deep down was actually really upset and wondering where the kids could be. So anyway, all right, so I'm just going to call it, I think Summer is the mystery woman in the ring footage. So those are the 4 mysteries that I was going to address. But I also want to take this opportunity to just bring it around to how could so many people turn a blind eye? We are talking about people who were in Rexburg when these kids went missing. So I'm going to first talk about Zulema. We're going to go through this calendar. So we're going to go kind of chronologically. So we're going to talk about Zulema, then Melanie Gibb and David Warwick, and then Melanie Boudreaux, and then finally Summer. Okay, so by way of review, I talked about this last week, so I won't go too much into it, but I believe that Zulema was the one who kind of kicked off, really validated Lori's desire for murder. This was in May, so this was before Charles was murdered. And she shared with her, and I had the feeling that something may happen to one of your family members. Lori excitedly replies, "Call me." She also said, "I will go in spirit when the bomb goes off, and I'll be there to see JJ's spirit to go to the presence of the Lord," and all of that. I won't go into all that because we already talked about that last week, except just to reinforce just how absolutely thrilled Lori was with Zulema sharing these things with her. She said, "I could not love you more right now. You are an amazing goddess." And like I said last week, I think Zulema was really fighting for a seat at the adult table in all of this, because she was the only one who was never anyone's kid in a previous probation. You see signs of both Lori and Chad ghosting her at different times, taking days, sometimes longer, to reply to her text. And you see Zulema again and again, just groveling, just trying so badly to be a part of all this. And I believe that, again, Zulema knew the plan was for the kids to die. And, again, Lori had said, "I'm hoping to have a reason soon to have to go back to Texas, working on that." And then Lori again is like, "Again, you are amazing, Zulema. This is the day after the previous one. I just love you so much. I could not do all of this without you." And I talked about that last week, about how I absolutely agree with her on this. But one thing I just found this week as I was preparing is Zulema even gave Lori justification, I believe gave Lori justification for JJ's murder using the Book of Mormon. So we're going to start here with, Lori was talking about people seeking her destruction. Zulema was like, who's seeking your destruction, et cetera, et cetera. And in the next one, and what I did was I took some of these longer screenshots and divided them up because I noticed last week, I mean, the resolution is already pretty low. I don't know what happened with Google Slides, but it's just not as crisp as it used to be. But anyway, it's the best that we have right now. Excuse me. But let's see. So this is September 21st. I believe, like I said, that JJ was murdered on the 22nd. We know that it was sometime either the 22nd or the 23rd because, according to GPS data, he was being buried on Chad's property the morning of the 23rd. So, so Zulema says, I think that's best that you stay hidden. Oh, because Lori had also said, let me, I want to go back to this one point. Lori said, FYI, if anybody asks about me or where I moved, you can just say that I moved in with my brother in Queen Creek, especially those who seek my destruction. So Zulema is like, I don't talk to anyone about you at all. It's et cetera, et cetera. I got rest, yada, yada, yada. And then wait, who's seeking your destruction? But why would Lori need to tell Zulema, hey, if anyone asks, about me or where I moved, tell them I moved with my brother in Queen Creek. I mean, Alex wasn't even living in Queen Creek when Charles was murdered. I don't think so. I think he was living in, I forgot what it's called, something Valley. But it's all in the Phoenix area, but it's still kind of weird because like when I visited Lori, she was living in Queen Creek. So I don't know why she would have thrown that out, but why do you need to be deceptive? Why don't you want people to know where you moved? And Zulema is like, hey, no problem. I don't talk to anyone anyway. So she's on board with everything. But so then Zulema tells her, I think that's best that you stay hidden. I'm staying quiet as if nothing is happening. Well, why do you need to make the point as if nothing is happening? Now, keep in mind, she had visited Lori shortly after Tylee was murdered. And just like everyone else had, deplorable lack of curiosity about where Tylee is. Then Lori says, you are right. Are you doing good? Is the Lord saying anything yet? Again, this is the day before I believe JJ was murdered. Zulema replies, he gave me this today, 2 Nephi 10:2. So, and just preparing me. Like Zulema felt like God gave her this scripture to prepare her for something. So, of course, I looked up the scripture, and 2 Nephi 10:2 says, for behold, the promises which we have are promises unto us according to the flesh. Wherefore, as it has been shown unto me that many of our children shall perish in the flesh because of unbelief. Nevertheless, God will be merciful unto many, and our children shall be restored, that they may come to that which will give them the true knowledge of their Redeemer. And Lori replies, I love it. It's so true. We are all here to do our missions. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds like the recording of Lori sharing her testimony in Melanie Gibb's house, where she was like, if we're the only member of our families left, like basically like, so be it, we're just doing our missions. If our kids move, go to the other side, is because they're doing their mission. In her mind, it's like, well, and if your whole family dies and they go to the other side, that's just because you need to do your mission, your kids need to do their missions. I mean, it's just insane how easily she's able to justify murder. But here's Zulema feeding the flames, like, oh, God gave me this today and this scripture, which of course would have delighted Lori to no end, just hours before JJ was murdered. And then Zulema adds, oh, he's just preparing me. Well, what would God need to be preparing you for, Zulema? What, the stress of knowing that someone else was murdered? Like, yeah, Charles was already down. Tylee was out of the picture. And now, Zulema needs to be prepared for something. And this just happens to be the scripture that prepares her. And then Lori, so creepy. You are a powerful little girl. I love it. And I already talked last week about, just how much she infantilized these other women. And this was just one more example. And by way of reminder, Zulema is older than I am. I'm older than Lori. So Zulema was quite a bit older than Lori. I think altogether, she was 9 years older than Lori. So it's just weird that Lori would be calling her baby girl, little girl, things like that. Okay. One more point about Zulema is I talked last week about how the point that Detective Hermosillo had challenged her on was, hey, you said that you didn't see Lori since she moved a few months ago. She was interviewed in December. So obviously when she was being interviewed the day of Alex's death, she would have been referring to her move to Rexburg, which was in, August, September. They left August 31st. They arrived September 1st. Obviously not their move to Hawaii, because they didn't move to Hawaii. They fled to Hawaii. And that was just a few weeks before Alex died. But there was a third time. And I knew about this, but I just didn't put it together with the fact that she had lied and said she hadn't seen Lori, but there was actually a third time. So this was leading up to Tammy's the first attempt on Tammy's life, allegedly. So we're going to start here. Lori, whoops, that's just so sensitive. Lori said to Zulema, "Hello, gorgeous. What does your schedule look like today?" This is the day before Tammy was allegedly shot at. And this was also the day that Lori flew from Idaho to Arizona. So on the 8th, Lori flew into Arizona, and law enforcement have her pinned at Melanie's rental home on the 8th, the evening of the 8th. So Lori wants to know what Zulema is doing, what her schedule looks like. Zulema said, "I work until 7, but in a few, I'm driving to my next case, and it will take me at least 20 minutes to get there." And then Zulema replies again, "I tried calling you, but it went straight to voicemail." Lori replied, "Sorry, my phone is having trouble. Just call me back on your way home." Zulema says, "Okay." Then Lori sends her, this is the address for Melanie Boudreaux's rental home in Chandler after she and Brandon broke up. Lori said, "This is the address for tonight. So excited to see you." Lori, "Are you still able to come tonight?" She wants to verify, because this was 1:31, and then at 8, Lori's like, "Hey, are you still coming?" Zulema replied, "Yes, I just finished, on my way." So at 8:06, Zulema was on her way. Lori, "Okay, perfect. Just text me when you are close and I'll come out since the kids are asleep." I would imagine that she's referring to Melanie Boudreaux's kids. Zulema says, "Okay." Then she says, "Almost there." Then Lori, this is almost at 8:30. "We are outside just hanging out. See you in a few." And then 11:20, just to confirm, Zulema says, "It was so great to see you." Oh, this is 11:20 the next day. And Zulema says, "It was so great to see you last night. Are you girls going to Missouri today?" And Lori said, "Yep, just got on the plane. Missing you. You are wonderful. I hope you will come soon. Let me know when you can, and we will get you a ticket," to kind of, tuck that away. So we know that on the day where Tammy was shot at, Lori and Melanie were in Arizona, in Chandler. And then the next morning, they headed out to Missouri. And this was shared with me. I shared it in another live last year. one of my confidential sources had told me that Lori and Melanie had flown to Missouri. And I was just like, Missouri, that was the one detail that I thought, that's a little weird. Like, why Missouri? Like, Lori's MO is more to just take off for Hawaii. She took off for Hawaii when they found Joe. Her whole family took off for Hawaii when her sister Stacy died, so this is a pretty solid pattern. Not, again, this is conjecture, but it's like, Missouri, why would they be going to Missouri? But then the FOIA docs confirmed that Lori went to Missouri, but not Melanie. But this conversation indicates, to me, is a confirmation that Melanie was also with her when she went to Missouri. And then when Tammy ultimately died, I think this is also only known by the confidential source that Melanie was with her in Hawaii. So I don't think that there's been confirmation of that in the FOIA docs. But I did have one weird confirmation I've talked about in other lives. Very, very early on in the case, I was in a Facebook group, and someone in the Facebook group said, and I know you were in Hawaii with Lori and Melanie Boudreaux. I saw a picture. So I was just like, okay, that's weird. No, I was not in Hawaii with Lori and Melanie Boudreaux, but I tucked that away. I was like, okay, so at some point in this story, it sounds like Lori and Melanie Boudreaux were in Hawaii. Okay. So by way of review, Zulema met up with Lori September 15th to the 17th when she flew to Idaho. Then on October 9th, when she met with Lori at Melanie, now Pawlowski's rental home. And then on November 14th, which I talked about in the last live, she met up with Lori and Chad in a hotel in Mesa, Arizona, when they were returning from their honeymoon. And I shared what I thought that was about. But there's a chance there might have been a fourth time, because if we go back to the previous slide, you'll see here that Lori said, this was after meeting up there, she said, I hope you come soon. Now, obviously she had already been out there once. Let me know when you can, and we will get you a ticket. So for all we know, Zulema might have flown out again, but I think more realistically, what they probably decided to do was, instead of flying Zulema out to Idaho for what I believe was the money exchange, I believe that Zulema was involved in the death of Alex. I do not believe that was a natural death at all. But I think that there's a good chance that Lori and Chad decided, hey, you know what? Instead of flying her up and having to hang out with her, because they had a lot going on at that time, they may have decided, okay, instead, let's have a longer layover in Mesa, but let's just meet up with her at the very end of the layover. So we know that it was about a 6-hour layover, and they plan to meet up just 2 hours before their second flight was leaving for Idaho. And so this would have been a really quick dinner. And Lori also said that Chad would give her a blessing. So I suspect that they probably did that again. Okay. So that was Zulema, knowing, I believe full well, that this plan was for the kids to be murdered. She was there when Tylee was gone. And as I've said over and over, Lori had no filter. So even 6 months after Joe's death, she's chirping away to people she either just met. She had just met Melanie Gibb the week before, or people she hadn't met yet, like Zulema and whoever else was there at that meeting. I believe Thor's voice may have been identified, and I'm not sure about that. But, these group members were at Melanie Gibb's house, which was a regular thing. And the special guest that night was Lori, Alexa, stop. Where she shared her crazy testimony. So this was 6 months after Joe's death, and Lori was still talking about how, she basically told the bishop, hey, either give me a temple recommend or I'm going to murder my second husband. And so she's still chirping away at this, has no filter whatsoever. And this just like when Zulema got there, she was the first guest that we know of who would have visited after Tylee was murdered, allegedly, obviously. But so, for us to expect that Lori wouldn't have been talking about it, wouldn't have been justifying it, that's just not a reasonable assumption on any level. But then this text that I found of the second Nephi 10:2, I mean, right before JJ was murdered. I mean, to me, that indicates Zulema wasn't just all in; she was feeding the fire. Okay, next up, Melanie Gibb. So again, by way of reminder, she arrived the day after Zulema left, and then David Warwick arrived the day after that, and they left together on the 23rd. This was before they were married. Okay, so Lori had a conversation with a woman named Sherry, and Sherry had, I'm sorry, not Lori. Melanie Gibb had a conversation with a woman named Sherry, and this was shortly after the case went public. This was, I believe, January 23rd. I have a slide with the date. I think it was January 23rd. And Melanie indicates that Lori gave her a look that said, yeah, Tylee is dead. So let's listen to that.
So she's told to move up to Rexburg. The Lord tells her, move up to Rexburg now.
Oops.
JJ with her, Tyler and JJ to Rexburg now. She takes Tyler and JJ with her. Tyler and JJ are up there. I know she's up there with both of them because I can hear them on the phone in the background while she's packing and moving. And then she tells me, I don't know, within a week or two that Tylee is now at BYU. He's up there. She's up there at school. So I go up and visit her, and I see that Tylee is not there, and I said, hey, Tylee's, I mentioned again, like, Tylee went to BYU, and she goes, yeah, but she gave me this really creepy look. Yeah, it was creepy. It was like, yes, she's dead, really, and that kind of look.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, almost that kind of look. But then I didn't know what to think about it at the time. I was like, why is she creepy when she looks at me like that,
First of all, I've already talked about this in other lives. It's unreasonable for Melanie to have believed that Tylee was at BYU. Tylee was only 16 at the time. It wouldn't have made sense that Tylee would have been staying on campus when they lived in campus housing and Tylee had her own room. If she had lived on campus, she would have shared a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other girls, and she was too young to stay on campus. But Melanie actually told Nate when he interviewed her, he was like, and when Lori told you that, basically he was asking her, did that make sense? Was that believable? And Melanie was like, it didn't feel true, or something to that effect. And it's like, no, this isn't about feelings. It wasn't reasonable. And then she had also told Sherry, I think it was Sherry, that Lori didn't even talk about Tylee. So again, if Tylee had been accepted at BYU at the age of 16, having been homeschooled and gotten a GED, all of these things, like, they just weren't reasonable. And Melanie even references that Tylee just had a GED. So it's like, oh, would she really have gotten into BYU with a GED? Obviously, lots of issues there. But then the fact that she's like, yeah, so Lori gave me this look like, yeah, she's dead, like that kind of look. Well, what does that look like? I do not believe that Lori just gave her a look that made her feel, all creepy on the inside. I believe that Lori would not have shut up about Tylee's death because they all thought, well, I shouldn't say they all thought. It was believed that Tylee was a very dark spirit. The only dark spirit who was darker than she was, who is part of the story, was Joe, and he was just barely darker. I think Joe was a 4.3 D for dark, and I think Tylee was a 4.2 D for dark. And I talked about this in other lives, including last week, but Chad had actually said that, 4 and higher in either direction, like or it might have been 3 and higher, but I think it was 4. They rarely switch sides because they actually made covenants. Well, yeah, so she, in his mind, she wouldn't have switched sides because she actually made a covenant with the devil. And I believe that's also why Joe was marked as sealed away. In other words, he wasn't eligible for any future probations. So I believe that all of these players knew who was dark, who was light. And we'll talk more about their little prayers. But yeah, I just don't believe. And Melanie, Zulema, Melanie, Boudreaux, all of these people, like, they lie with such ease, in my opinion. It's almost like if their lips are moving, they're probably lying, and they're probably trying to save their ass in some way. So, okay. Right. Yes. The date of that recording was January 23rd. Now, also keep in mind, Melanie didn't come forward to be interviewed until May. So from January to May, she just left all the family members kind of twisting in the wind. And I believe she knew that the kids were dead. And we'll touch more on that. Okay. So Melanie says in this interview with Detective Hermosillo and Lieutenant Ball that she had told Serena that she believed that they had killed the kids. So let's listen to that.
You think that because Serena had a group of kids, Lori was jealous? Well, I think so. He would say, this is how it started. He'd say, no, she keeps calling me. Serena keeps.
Okay, in case you can't hear this, she's talking about Serena being kicked out of the group. Serena claims that she was kicked out of the group in March. Just a little side note, there's a text interaction about, like, where Lori says, hey, I can't join the group call today because she thought her phone was being monitored. And that was in May, and Serena was on that list. So clearly she wasn't kicked out of the group in March. But that's also the story that Melanie is kind of going with. And Melanie reached out to Serena in January, because I think in January, Melanie was kind of freaking out. She was manic. She reached out to Sherry, who she had never met in person. Like, Sherry had just reached out to her once and said she enjoyed her book. And then Melanie has this conversation with this woman. But anyway, okay, so that's what they're talking about. And she mentions that Chad would tell Lori, hey, Serena keeps calling me and asking me all these questions.
Asking more and more questions. And then he would tell that to Lori, and Lori would talk to him about that and say, oh, she wants to learn more power. And she's actually now getting dark because she's getting like Boudreaux or something something stupid like that. And then so pretty soon they deemed her more dark, and they just cut her off. Basically, I'm not gonna talk to you anymore. So she went out of the country and came back. She got sick, and she was asking me, what happened? Was some evil spirit touch me when I was there? And Serena had a hard time swallowing all this. After I came to her and said, these people are bad.
Now, take note, and I know that the sound quality is so bad. It's just in the now with the Google Slides, it's just not as quality as it used to be. But that's also why I always share a link to the presentation so you can open this up and listen to the videos yourself. But she's selling this like she had to enlighten Serena, like Serena just believed all of this, just, took it all in, hook, line, and sinker. And, she's kind of like talking down about Serena because Melanie keeps insisting like she didn't believe any of this. And one of my favorite parts in this whole interview is when Detective Hermosillo calls her out, like, we know you called Lori mom. But anyway, okay, getting back to it.
And I had told her the whole story, everything that they killed the kids, and I really felt they did. And she was like,
Okay, that's the main point there. She said, I had told her the whole story that they killed the kids, and I really believe they did.
and we went to the temple. And she's like, no, do you write about this? I'm like, Serena, the whole thing is a lie. And she was so convinced. She was so convinced. And she's a very intelligent woman. She's a very beautiful and amazing woman. But she was just sucked into it.
Unlike Melanie, Serena, even though she was intelligent and beautiful, I don't know what her beauty would have had to do with this. She was just sucked in. She's delusional. Okay. I do believe that Serena was sucked in. They were all sucked in. And Serena's role in all of this was they all thought they had powers over the elements. We don't know what Melanie Gibb's power was. And she, of course, is not going to disclose that. I do hope that that comes up in the trial. Excuse me. But we know that Serena thought she had power over water. Zulema thought she had power over the elements to create earthquakes and, natural disasters. So they each thought they had some special power. And when they would have these castings for these future victims, they would use their special powers to try to kill anyone who was deemed a zombie. So now, Melanie tries to walk that back, and so did Serena. They all try to make it sound like, no, we were just, praying that they would be freed. But we'll get to that more in a minute. How did I pinpoint the timestamp was January? Well, in the police report, excuse me, Serena said she did not find out about Lori saying she was evil. So we know this was the conversation Melanie had with her until January, when Melanie Gibb told her. So that helps us pinpoint once again that Melanie knew or believed in January that both of the kids had been killed. Melanie also believed that through prayer, people would die. They wouldn't be freed. Now she tries to sell that now, but she can't keep track of her lies. And so here, the police report said Chad would confirm their efforts by telling them they got rid of so many zombies during their prayer. Melanie stated that through prayer, these people would physically pass away. So if they became a zombie, they all believed that through these castings, these prayers, these people would physically pass away. They couldn't be redeemed in any way. They could only, and we know from Ian Pawlowski because he codified all of their beliefs, but left it on a laptop that he gave to one of his kids. And then his ex-wife, Natalie Pawlowski, found the document and shared it. Excuse me. But we know that if someone was considered a zombie, they were in limbo. And the only thing that they could do to free the person was to kill the body so that they could then be free to move on to their next probation or their next life, unless they were so dark that they were, like I said, sealed away and not eligible for any more probations. I asked Melanie if these people were living beings. And this is so creepy. She's talking to a detective. And this was, I believe, when she was being interviewed by Gilbert police. So this wasn't the interview with Rexburg police. But it says she then provided an example using the police station. They would first check to see how many zombies were there. So how many people who were working in the police station or in the police station were zombies. Then they would say their prayer and Chad would check his pendulum. Chad would then come back with a number of how many died. I asked Melanie if these people would experience a physical death, and she stated that they would. Again, using the example of the police station, she indicated that their prayer would have physically killed the people at the police station. So this was very early on in the investigation. By the time she decided to do her interview with Nate Eaton, she had walked back her story and cleaned it up and changed quite a few elements. But when she had this initial interview with Gilbert police, I believe it was, I'm sure it was Gilbert police, they, she was being much more transparent. Melanie indicated that there was no evidence that their prayers caused death because people die every day. You can't make this stuff up. Another contradiction is Melanie had said in that interview, so this, I believe that both of these notes were from her interview on December 6th. 2019. So this was before the story went public. She really had no sense of scope for like how big this was. So I think that I think she just didn't feel as endangered. And then when the story went public and, she was following the press, I think she started freaking out, because we also know that in February 2020, a spokesperson had confirmed that she had retained a lawyer and was cooperating with police. But then by May, when she was interviewed by Eaton, she was like, why would I need a lawyer since God is on my side? Anyway, okay, so December, it says, during a conference call, I learned Melanie Gibb hired an attorney and spoke briefly with Rexburg police. Melanie said the last time she saw JJ was on September 23rd. So that was the Monday morning that she and David Warwick left. So the last time she saw JJ was on September 23rd when she visited Lori in Rexburg. Lori asked Melanie to take JJ with her, but Melanie declined. When I read this, I just about went through the roof. Like, this is Melanie trying to put her best foot forward, and she's still like, yeah, Lori asked me to take JJ with me, but I declined. Melanie then returned to Utah with her boyfriend, David Warwick. And anyway, on 11/26, we already know that she received the call from Lori and Chad, et cetera, et cetera. So when she was interviewed before this case went public, she said that the last time she saw JJ was on September 23rd. But by the time she testified in Chad's preliminary hearing in August 2020, here's what she had to say.
Call your attention to the morning of September 23rd, 2019. What did you do during the morning of September 23rd, 2019?
Upon awakening, I got ready for the day and came downstairs, had a brief conversation with Lori Pawlowski, and then got into the truck with David, and we drove off to Pocatello.
Okay. What was your conversation? Do you recall the content of your conversation with Lori Pawlowski that morning?
Yes.
Could you recall approximately?
Okay, so just a recap. Special Prosecutor Rob Wood is asking her about the morning of the 23rd. And now he is asking for the details of her and David's conversation with Lori. Take note of how she can't seem to find the word zombie.
What time did you have this conversation with Lori Vallow?
Sometime between 8 and 9.
Okay. What did you speak about with Ms. Vallow that morning?
She shared with David and I that JJ was acting with a lot of energy and trying to remember the words. But
She said that JJ was acting with a lot of energy. She's trying to remember the words, but
she recalled him climbing upon the refrigerator, knocking a picture down of Jesus, she said, and then climbing up upon the cabinets.
And did you see JJ that morning?
No,
Do you know if he was in the house that morning?
no.
Did you,
okay, so he just asked her, "Did you see JJ that morning?" And she said no. And he asked, "Do you know if he was in the house that morning?" And she said no.
do you have any idea where he was that morning?
No.
Do you have any idea of where he was that morning? And that concludes that. So here in December, before this case went public, she said that she did see JJ the morning of the 23rd, but by the time of the hearing, excuse me, she said she didn't see JJ. And David was no better. He said he knew Lori was lying and did nothing. So let's listen to that. This is from one of the datelines.
A friend of Melanie's named David was there too that weekend. They were leaving Monday morning, September 23rd.
When I went to say goodbye, Lori was just there, and she said that JJ had one of his zombie moments and climbed up on my fridge, pushed my picture of Christ down, and climbed up onto the upper cabinets and was stuck between the ceiling and the cabinet, just raging. And I'm looking at the cabinets, and I saw absolutely no sign of any damage of any kind, not even a scuff.
You knew right away she was lying to you.
Yeah. So I just said, I would like to see JJ. I wanted to see him. And she said, oh, Alex, he was out of control, so I had Alex come and get him.
So, I mean, there are so many issues with this whole story. First of all, between 8 and 9, JJ would have been in school. Between the two of them, they had 11 kids. So it's not like they wouldn't be, unfamiliar with a morning schedule. So even if David had said that Lori said, Alex came and took him to school, like that would have given them at least like a modicum of, some kind of, plausible deniability. But to say like, first of all, JJ was supposedly raging, climbed up on the refrigerator, knocked a magnet that had a picture of Jesus down, climbs up on the cabinet, is raging, according to David. This is a small apartment. It was like kind of like a townhome, but I don't even think it was 1,000 square feet. And they were in the apartment at that time. So if JJ had climbed up on the refrigerator and then onto, like above the cabinets, it would have been absolute mayhem. JJ, even when he was talking normally, he didn't have like much of an inside voice. He was very loud, very boisterous. He really did have a lot of energy. So if he was raging, he would have just been that much louder. And they don't even point to the fact of like, well, we didn't hear anything. We didn't hear a ruckus. We didn't hear a child raging, because that would have obviously brought them down. They're just like, I looked at the cabinet. I didn't see any scuffs, but even with their crazy dumbed down story, it still wouldn't make sense. Like, wait a minute. So, David, you said you want to see JJ. Lori tells you that Alex came and took him away. Why? Because he was being a zombie. You know that she's lying, but then they just get in his truck and drive away. We also know from the interview that Melanie and Lori, I think they had 2 or 3 phone conversations while Melanie and David were on their way back to Utah. So, like they could have on their way out, like even if they, were too afraid to call in a welfare check or, stop by the police station and say, hey, you know what? There were lots of red flags. We're just concerned about the safety of this child. She has another child who, there are some current concerns there. Like they could have called in a welfare check, even anonymously. They did nothing. They didn't stop by police. They didn't call police. Melanie and Lori have multiple conversations when she's on her way back, and they just did nothing. Okay. So 3 takeaways from these individual things that I shared about Melanie. 1, why lie? It shouldn't be hard to remember if she saw JJ on Monday. We're not talking about, like, some people will say, like, oh, well, I don't remember what I had for breakfast the day before. Kind of like, well, how can Melanie remember all of these details? Well, you know what? When you find out that you were with someone when really serious crimes were committed, and besides that, Melanie told this, excuse me, this woman, Sherry, like, yeah, she gave me this creepy look, like, yeah, she's dead. I mean, so there are all these red flags. Melanie also claims that Lori had said JJ turned into a zombie the day before she got there. I personally do not believe that, because Zulema was talking about, escorting JJ to heaven back in May. So I think they all knew, like I said before, that the plan was for the kids to be gone. That's why you have Melanie Boudreaux saying, hey, you know what? You should probably get a life insurance policy on JJ and Tylee. Excuse me. Okay. So again, like when you find out that you have overlaps with these psychopaths who are murdering, like they would have already had, even if we totally suspend reality for a minute and say they didn't catch on that the kids were possibly dead, there were a lot of creepy things happening, and they would have been reviewing these details, like what was up with this, what was up with this, all of these different details. And then you would be reviewing in your mind. Even my trip in 2018, when I found out everything that was going, it was like I was just reviewing and reviewing, trying to put together like any details about, at that time it was only Joe's death. But that's just normal, like you are part of something really traumatizing. We are going to have stronger memories around things that we review in our minds or review with others. That's going to develop stronger memories. Now that, also someone can be traumatized and completely black things out. I just don't think that that's what happened here, in my opinion. But okay, so first of all, why lie? It shouldn't be hard to remember if she saw JJ. You could just review that film strip in your mind, and she could talk to David. Between the two of them, yeah, they should have been able to say definitively if they saw JJ on the morning of the 23rd. Also, according to Melanie, Lori offered for them to take JJ. Now, I don't actually think that this happened, but if we're going with Melanie's story, well, Melanie is saying that Lori identified him as a zombie. She already knew from Charles what happens to zombies. She says that repeatedly in interviews. She knew that someone being identified as a zombie meant that they were going to die. She makes that point in her interview with Keith. So even in her putting her best foot forward, she makes this claim, but then said she just declined. Like, that just makes no sense. Why, anyway, okay. So, and then also, why not help? If both David and Melanie thought Lori was lying about this story that would have been kind of the grand finale of JJ, his ultimate zombie moment, where he even knocks a picture of Jesus off the refrigerator as if that is supposed to indicate that he was clearly demon possessed. So, if they believe she was lying and there was this crazy story that just couldn't be verified, why not call for help? So, again, in my opinion, I believe that both she and David knew that Tylee was gone and now something had happened to JJ. Even when Melanie talks about, David waking up in the middle of the night with this nightmare, and she went to Lori's door and tried to open it. Like, who would do that? Who would just go to their friend's door because your boyfriend who you're in bed with, excuse me, had a nightmare? Why would you then go to your friend's door and try to walk in? But then she was like, oh, the door was locked. I mean, there are just so many issues here. So for them to not call in a welfare check or do anything to try to, just verify that JJ is, he's okay, he's verified alive, is absolutely inexcusable. Next up, Melanie Pawlowski, again, by way of review. Now we know from the FOIA docs, not just from my confidential source, that she was in Rexburg from the 26th to the 29th. And the FOIA docs indicate that from the 25th to the 30th, Alex, Lori, and Chad were planning the shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. They don't include Melanie, even though Melanie was there for all the dates except the bookends. So that makes no sense, but that's when she was there. So I showed a video last week where she's talking to Keith, and he asked if she saw the kids when she went up there, and she was like, when I moved up there, no, I didn't see the kids. And he was like, no, they were gone. And she said, when I moved up there in November, I didn't see the kids. And it's like, well, yeah, you didn't see them when you visited there in September, or when you visited there in October and signed on your lease. So this is two different times where she visited and did not see the kids. Then she moves in next door to Lori and never sees them. And this just isn't a concern for her at all. Now, one thing I just noticed this week as I was preparing for this live, it says, oh my gosh. Okay. So Melanie was being interviewed. This was by Gilbert Police. This was after Brandon was shot at. And it says, per my request, Melanie provided me with the identification information for Alex, Lori, and Tylee. Oh, a little bit of background. They were asking her about the shooting of Brandon. And then Melanie is just throwing as many distractions and diversions in there. So she starts talking about the shooting death of Charles and how that was ruled self-defense. And, so she's talking about this other event altogether, but reveals something in the midst of that that's very interesting. Per my request, Melanie provided me with the identification information for Alex, Lori, and Tylee's name fit in there. Melanie was unsure if Lori, Alex, and again, Tylee lived together. Melanie believed, and again, Tylee's name fits in here. There's some element of It could be something else. But this particular writer always puts the first name in all caps and the last name in just what do they call it? Initial cap. And here you see Tylee Ryan Fitz in here. So Tylee Fitz in all of these. Melanie believed Tylee was, and they actually quote this because it's so weird, in college or something, but did not know where. So here she is telling this story. They're not even asking her about Tylee. They're not asking about the shooting at this particular juncture. They're not asking about the shooting of Charles. They're wanting to get to the bottom of the shooting of her estranged husband. And she can't even, she doesn't even say BYU. She's just like, I don't know, she's in college or something, but just didn't know where. I mean, just 0 F's given about, where Tylee could possibly be. Also, so in the boilerplate of some of these search warrants, and the boilerplate is just like extra information that's just added to the bottom. And I read this because I just was looking for any detail. And I actually found out that Tylee was named a suspect in Charles' murder in the boilerplate of this one search warrant. I think it was in the boilerplate. And that was just so that this was Detective Yinquin, I believe she was the one who wrote the search warrant. And it was so that she could get Tylee's email data from September to December. So clearly she wanted her email data from the time that they could last verify that she was alive. But she does it by saying, yeah, she is not a person of interest. Yeah. She's a suspect in the murder of Charles Vallow. So if you think she's a suspect, well, why wouldn't you order her email data from before Charles' murder? And so my point here is this boilerplate information. Most of the time it was very boring and just, tedious. But in this particular instance, I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. So it says on December 5th, 2019, detectives in Idaho had contact and interviewed a source of information close to the person listed and involved in this ongoing investigation. So on December 5th, they interviewed someone who was close to the person listed, and I'm sure that name was redacted, and involved in the ongoing investigation. The source alleged, it's kind of hard to read. The source alleged that, he or she had been told by at least one of these parties that JJ and his sister Tylee were now deceased at the hands of the persons involved. No bodies have been located and the information is not verified at this time. So they interviewed someone on December 5th who said that they had this information from a person who was involved in the ongoing investigation that JJ and his sister were now deceased, and specifically that they were murdered because they were now deceased at the hands of the persons involved. And so I immediately went back to the timeline, and the only people who I can find, and we do have a pretty exhaustive timeline of when different people were involved because of what's his name? Mark Means, before he was taken off the case. He was asking for for like recordings of interviews, notes from interviews, all of these different things. And he ended up giving us a very a very exhaustive, well, we can't say exhaustive, a very long list of people who were interviewed and the dates they were interviewed. And we also know elsewhere from another document that Natalie and Ian Pawlowski were interviewed on December 5th. Ian obviously had a source of information who was involved, but I believe that by the time Ian recorded, his kind of codification of their beliefs, he did that to give it to Melanie and now his attorney after he told Melanie on December 19th that he had participated in the investigation and had worn a wire, and he wasn't cooperating anymore at that point. So her attorney, who now became his attorney, is that Garrett Smith, said, okay, you need to write down everything that you told Rexburg police and the FBI, because Ian went back the next day on December 6th without Natalie and was interviewed again. That was by his own volition. But anyway, so I have always been on the prowl to see if there was anyone else who was interviewed on December 5th. But I think even just by his wording in that document that he wrote, which of course we were never supposed to see, only his attorney was supposed to see that. But he not dumbed down, he softened the language. Like, Melanie was afraid that Alex may have murdered the kids, or he may have had to do this. And, so all the language was softened. But at the time that he was interviewed by Rexburg police, he was scared. That's why he was interviewed. In fact, his weekend with the kids was I think the weekend after this. And he actually told his ex-wife to keep the kids. And when I looked at the calendar, I mean, now it's been almost a couple of years since I looked at that, but that would have been like I think it was like the week before Christmas. So I was like, oh, so Natalie, it looks like, would have had the kids that Christmas. And Ian was like, no, you keep the kids. So that's just like a peek behind the curtain of how scared this guy was, that he was willing to wear a wire and was willing to be interviewed by Rexburg police and the FBI, and then come back the next day and be, suited up with a wire and all of that. So anyway, so I personally believe, and these weren't in the same document, that's why I have the red line here, and this was this was just another court document, and this was part of the search warrant. So I believe that Ian knew the kids were dead, and he would have known that from Melanie. Also, according to Ian's sister, so Melanie and Ian, before they were married, they had Thanksgiving with Ian's sister. And in fact, it was in front of Ian's sister's house that Alex and Melanie or Melanie left Lori's car, the Nissan Rogue, for Colby to pick up. So that's kind of how that fits in. So they're having Thanksgiving with Ian's sister, Hannah. And it says, Hannah said approximately 2 weeks ago that she was told by Ian, that Melanie was told Al had, quote, taken care of the children. And I believe that this said, of the children, like JJ and Tylee didn't fit. Excuse me. So that's my attempt at an redaction. It does seem to make sense. But this lines up with what Ian said in his document anyway, that, except in softened language, that, that Alex may have had to take care of the kids. but it was unknown what that statement meant. I touched on this last week, but Ian had stopped cooperating with the investigation and actually called the case hype. So I'll play that.
About this time, something quite out of the blue. Ian's ex-wife heard about all the strange events, and she wasn't happy that the kids she shared with Ian would have to hang around with these people.
She said that she was going to be going in and talk to the police tomorrow. At that point, I said, okay, yeah, I'll go with you. And I'll share what I know.
What Ian didn't know was that waiting, along with the Rexburg police, were some other investigators.
Can you tell me, Ian, how you got involved with the FBI? Yeah, I went and sat down at the Rexburg Police Department and, explained everything that I knew and, theorized on things that, as they may have happened, as I understood and from what I'd heard.
And right then, this story took a turn worthy of a novel, or maybe an episode of Mob Wives.
You made some recordings? I did. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. At the request of the FBI, Ian wore a wire to record his brand new wife, Melanie. Tried to get her to talk, he said, about Chad, Lori, and the things the FBI wanted to know. What did they want you to record?
They wanted the whereabouts of Tylee and JJ, if there was anything I could get on that.
What?
I did my best for a little bit, and there was nothing there. It wasn't being discussed.
Here he was, sitting with the woman he had just married, the woman he said he was in love with, telling us he did not tell her for 2 weeks that he was spying on her for the FBI. How'd you find out?
He told me.
Uh-huh.
And you're shocked, like, why didn't you come to me? I want to help.
The whole point was not to come to you.
Sure.
They wanted to know your unguarded thoughts.
Yeah, getting married really quick, they're working on us. It's already hard enough. And, we're hanging on by a thread. And I had to look at the intent of, acting out of fear. And he just trying to do the right thing, but confused and thrown in this mess. And I didn't have anything to hide. And so, okay, record my conversations. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And they said?
That she forgave, and we're moving forward, and I'm supporting her.
You're still cooperating with the FBI?
Not actively. I mean, any questions they have, we'll answer through our lawyers, obviously. I opened up to Melanie because, I'm starting to see her perspective, this isn't all the hype it's been made up to be.
Hype? Hold that thought. It won't be the last we hear from Ian.
That last line, this isn't all the hype it's being made out to be, absolutely infuriated me at the time. It still does. But in light of everything that I believe that he knew that Melanie had told him, yeah. I mean, it's just one more example of someone else, Melanie, who was not only in Rexburg once after both of the kids were missing, but twice, and then lived next door and did nothing, just turned a blind eye. Okay. Next up, Summer Shiflett. Again, this is if Summer was the one in the ring footage on October 29th. One thing that was interesting was in January, she had done a memorial video for Alex and didn't include JJ and Tylee in this memorial video. So this video made its rounds in the groups. Summer was very, very upset about that. I still have the video, but in the midst of she had all these pictures of like the cousins and, Zach Cox, Colby, her kids, obviously lots of pictures of Alex from, childhood on, but there were no pictures of JJ and Tylee. And so that was already that doesn't seem in keeping with someone who is just like, yeah, we don't, like we believe that Lori, because obviously at this point, the welfare check had already been performed. Lori and Chad were on the run. They're hiding from law enforcement. And according to Summer and Janice, they totally believe that Lori knew exactly where the kids were. The kids were fine. But at the same time, she does this memorial video for the funeral. Who Janice had, this was kind of funny. She had said that that they only invited people who didn't believe that Alex was a murderer. So it was something about, it was a small group of people. It was, I think, her most hilarious statement in her interviews. But I think that was very unusual. Also, after the kids were found, she wrote this memorial. You can go to the Facebook page. It is set to public. And she shared some really nice pictures of her with, Tylee and JJ. But there were a couple that personally rubbed me the wrong way. So she had just found out, like, yeah, even though, you supposedly just a month before believed that the kids were fine, the kids weren't missing to her. Oh, whoops. Let me see. Oh, okay. I thought the video had stopped sharing. But, so then why would you not? Whoops. Okay. There we go. She shares in this memorial where she, had just found out, like, oh, the kids' remains were found in Chad's property on the 19th, I think, and then their identities were confirmed through DNA. I believe it was on the 22nd. I think that she published this the same day. But one of the pictures that she shared was this picture of her and Tylee at the gun range. And this rubbed me the wrong way because it seemed to kind of send the message. And again, I might be looking too much into it, but it just, if nothing else, the optics on it are bad, because here we already know that Charles was shot and killed. Now the kids are dead. We don't know how they died, but I just know when I saw this, I was just like, why are you sharing a picture of you and Tylee at the gun range? To me, it kind of seemed like she was floating, like, hey, and just to let you know, Tylee knows how to use a gun too. Excuse me. One weird thing is when you looked at the reflection in Summers' sunglasses, and it was Janice Summers who had pointed this out to me. This looks like Alex's truck. So who knows? But one of the other pictures she shared was this picture, and this really made me angry, of Barry groping Tylee. I mean, you can see she's like young, just, developing, and his hand is right here, which is extremely inappropriate. There, even in the document that I have that I can't share publicly, there are very serious allegations being made about Barry in that document. That doesn't prove, these are just people who were interviewed by the person who was taking these notes. But regardless, I mean, Summer would have had access to lots of really endearing pictures that didn't include, being at a gun range or Barry, like, bending down. He has a creepy look on his face, and his hand is very inappropriately placed at minimum. And anyway, when she and Janice were interviewed, this was just almost a month to the day. This was in May, before the kids were found. So they hadn't made any kind of, like, they hadn't done any interviews. And then, like, they just happened to do this interview a month before the kids were found. But she says in this interview, she didn't ask Lori where the kids were.
Have you asked your sister where the kids are?
No,
I've talked to her a couple of times. The first time I talked to her, everything is recorded, and I know she can't tell me, and I don't want to put her in a position.
So she's already stating here that she didn't talk to Lori until she was taken into custody by saying, you know, I talked to her a couple times and, you know, everything's recorded. You know, this just sounds like she had no communication with Lori until Lori was arrested and incarcerated.
And that's going to make anything worse for her. I want her to know I love her and I support her, and she knows I love her and the kids.
Have you asked your sister where the kids are?
I hate that Google Slides does that. She also defended her and lied about knowing that there wasn't any conspiracy around Charles' shooting. We'll listen to that.
Summer, do you think that she is guilty of the things that she is accused of?
No, I don't, not even a little bit. I know for a fact that she did not conspire to kill Charles in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, I'm just going to stop right there. She knows for a fact that she didn't conspire to kill Charles. Again, going back to the affidavit of probable cause, that affidavit was highly redacted, but then the entire affidavit of probable cause was included in the police report that was released in the second FOIA document dump by Chandler, and the entire affidavit of probable cause was unredacted. So when I shared that whole point of like, I'll kill him myself, you know, and then Lori saying, no, we need you to be safe. This was Summer saying that to Lori, and that was verified. So, and then we will take a very deep dive into the events leading up to July 11th when we go through the timeline.
I spent a lot of time with Lori and Alex leading up to Charles' death, and I know that there was never any kind of discussion like that about it. Charles texted probably 20 or 30 times, ranging from, I swear I'll be nice, please call me, to your end is coming soon. So I saw a lot of threatening texts from him. If Alex hadn't been there.
That part is true. He did send threatening texts to Lori. So just in the every effort to be fair, this part was actually true.
I think Lori and Tylee would have been on the news for a very different reason.
And her last statement is absolutely ridiculous. If Alex hadn't been there, Lori and Tylee would have been on the news. She's basically implying that if Alex hadn't been there, Lori and Tylee would be the ones who would have been murdered. And this is what I made a reference to. Lori found out about the potential intervention on July 9th, 2019. This intervention was Charles and Adam Cox were going to try, well, Adam, supposedly, they were going to try to set up this meeting with Holmes, who was, I think, the stake president, and basically, get her to either repent for these things that she was saying and doing, or have her temple recommend revoked. Excuse me. She, meaning Lori, reached out to Alex Cox, Melanie Boudreaux, and Summer Shiflett. Again, all of these redactions were left unredacted. That's the only way I could get something as specific as that. To warn them of the elaborate plan that Adam and Charles had. Adam and his son, Zach, were picked up at the airport. Now, that's actually not true. Zach already lived. He was living with Brandon and Melanie at the time, but that's an error. That's forgivable. So Adam and his son, Zach, were picked up at the airport on July 10th, unless, who knows, Zach might have been visiting Adam and Nicole, and they might have flown in together. So maybe. But they were picked up at the airport. on July 10th. So this was the day before Charles was shot by Adam's mother. Summer provided Lori with updates regarding Adam's whereabouts and asked Lori if she wanted to run interference. Meaning, Summer asked Lori if Lori wanted Summer to run interference. Lori told Summer that she was trying to figure it out. Summer commented, "I will kill him myself if that is the case." Multiple exclamation marks. Lori responded, "No, I need you safe." And then this next sentence is one of the most ridiculous sentences in all of the FOIA docs. "There is no indication who Summer was talking about." This is a day before Charles was murdered, and all of their interactions were about Charles, all the interactions that were included in all of this. So here you have Summer, like kind of beating her chest, going, if that's the case, whatever that was, I'll kill him myself. And then Lori's like, no, I need you safe. Is absolutely ridiculous. So, all right. And Summer also bragged about her hitman boy toy, Edgar. And this was after Brandon was shot at. And I've talked about this before. Like, Lori just set her up. I mean, it really just shows how absolutely ruthless Lori was, because, first of all, there's just some details about Summer shared Lori's religious beliefs. She went so far as to tell Lori back in, I think it was February. It was after the big brouhaha with Charles, and Lori took off and all this stuff. Summer was feeding Lori information and actually told her that's how I think that's how Lori found out that Charles had gotten I forget what it's called. It's something that gave the police the right to pick her up for a mandatory psych hold. I think it was a 72-hour psych hold. So Summer let Lori know about that, and that's how she knew about that before she even went in. But Summer actually said to her, I something to the effect of, "I support you. I know that you hear from the other side and you're doing your mission." So Summer wasn't just kind of a casual, Lori didn't have a lot of trust in her as time wore on. So I think sometime after Charles was killed, her trust rating was kind of low. But anyway, so Summer is giving Lori a heads up, an incident that supposedly happened to Brandon. So at this point, by October, Lori especially was, becoming much more savvy, being more careful, according to the FOIA docs, about what she put in writing and stuff. So Summer's trying to be careful. She said, an incident that supposedly happened to Brandon. So this was just a few days. This was on the 7th, and he was shot at on October 2nd. So she says, an incident that supposedly happened to Brandon sounds highly suspicious. Lori, Brandon's Tesla or the Tesla company? She is goading Summer. This is her own sister who has supported her. She is where Lori had become very careful about what she put in text. Not totally, because she and Chad were still putting ridiculous things in text. But here she is, instead of protecting her sister, she's like, so Brandon's Tesla or the Tesla company? Summer, Brandon's. He claims someone shot at him and shot the window to his Tesla a few days ago. Police are looking into it. As if Lori wouldn't have known about this. They're just so ridiculous. Summer, I think he is either trying to set Al up or make a future hit on Mel, make him look innocent. Knowing him. But who knows, ... knowing him, ... sounds suspicious to me. Lori replies, maybe it was Edgar. Where is he? 2 question marks. Summer replies with multiple emojis they didn't translate in the system that they use. And so when you see like those weird symbols, it just means that we don't know what the emojis were. But a lot of emojis, I doubt it was him, ... He wouldn't miss ... or leave witnesses ... He usually makes things look like natural causes ... But IDK where he is or what he is doing. So Summer has absolutely no chill. She takes her boy toy, Edgar, just chucks him under the bus. Was like, like he usually makes things look like natural causes. Now, I just don't put a lot of confidence in these statements. I think she was being braggadocious, like, hey, I'm baller too. And so is my boyfriend who looks like he just started puberty last Thursday. I mean, it's so ridiculous. But Summer adds, he has a message to me on his Smule page, but I haven't responded. Summer then forwarded Lori an image of an unknown subject on music recording app Smule with the username XZZYZX. So, obviously a stone cold killer. Like, that's just so savvy. It is suspected that this was Edgar. So Lori just totally set her up. And here's Summer, who's now like trying to play this off as like, whoa, like, of course we believe that, Lori, that she's innocent. She didn't have anything to do with Charles' death. But then, here she is like just walking right into this trap that Lori set for her about her boyfriend, Edgar. Okay. She also says that Lori told her, I've always taken care of my kids.
I want her to know I love her and I support her and she knows I love her and the kids. But I did tell her we were worried about her and the kids the first time I spoke with her. And she said to me, you know me and I've always taken care of my kids. And I do know that. It's removed every doubt in my mind that she's done anything wrong. I know she wouldn't do that. That's just not who she is. And her children are everything. She's always put them first.
Not even going to touch that. And I think this is the last video snippet. I'm just going to let you listen to it. I think this comment is absolutely bizarre.
Is it fair to criticize her for being in paradise in Hawaii while there's a manhunt on for her kids? I mean, that didn't look good.
It didn't look good. I agree. We agree. We didn't like the way it looked, but we knew that they weren't missing to her. That's a whole difference if your children are missing, or if they're not missing to her.
Yeah, she wasn't like, oh, my kids are missing, I'm going to go on a vacation. That's very different scenario.
Yeah, Summer, that's exactly what happened. This case, there was a welfare check, and then she and Chad took off for Hawaii. So Summer is like, it's not like, like, oh, my kids are missing, I'm just going to go on vacation. Okay. Last point. They both told Gilbert police. They were both interviewed separately on December 17th. So this was this was 5 days after Alex died and 3 days before the case went public. So they were both interviewed separately, and this was this. Later that day, Detective McDermott and I contacted Lori's sister, Summer Shiflett. They misspelled the name. Summer denied knowledge for where, that was probably like the kids were located and had not seen them in months. Summer believed both children were in the care of Lori. Summer was protective of Lori and believed Kay Woodcock was using law enforcement as a tool to gain custody of, obviously, that was JJ. Summer was encouraged to relay to Lori that we, law enforcement, simply needed to confirm that, the kids or JJ and Tylee were not in danger and that their welfare could be confirmed in person or via a video call. I provided Summer with my business card and we concluded our contact. I later spoke with Lori's mother, Janice Cox, via phone. Janice was also confident that, I'm sure JJ and Tylee were well and in the custody of Lori. I mean, so she actually goes so far as to say that they were in Lori's custody, which was, very bizarre. Janice did not have further information, and I requested she pass my name and contact number to Lori. It just so happened that someone from California and Kansas on the same day, so this is December 17th, that someone in California and Kansas logged into Tylee's Facebook on that same day. So Janice and Summer were interviewed, and then on the same day, someone, and again, this is where the their IP address put them. Now IP addresses are more shared, so they're not as accurate. But back in 2019, I know from working with clients, I would have to mask my IP address or set it using a tool, set it to another location in order to hide where I was from. And that was like to, test their systems and things like that. I wasn't doing anything shady. But so there is the chance that this was a shared IP address, and it might just be completely coincidental that there was a family member in Kansas and that there were, family members in California, or it could just be like Lori logging in to Tylee's Facebook on December 17th for some reason. We know from the FOIA docs that someone had actually accepted friend requests to Tylee's Facebook. So there was suspicious activity going on around Tylee's Facebook at this time. I'm just noting that it just happened to happen It just happened that these two events took place on the same day. And their last resort, basically, Summer says, they keep insisting the kids are fine. I'm sure the kids are fine. I'm sure nothing happened to them. And then Summer throws out this caveat to protect Lori.
Is there any part of the dark recesses of your minds that say maybe she cracked and maybe this is not going to end up well?
We have gone through those scenarios
If
probably
the- if
100
something-
times.
If something has happened to those children, it is not by her doing. And it's not by her permission to do something. There is no way that she did anything to them. There's just no way.
Yeah, we know her well enough to know that. We know that.
Mhm.
And she couldn't crack enough to do harm to her children.
Okay, so where am I? Oh, wait, there was, I think
Is there
maybe
any-
one more. Yeah, no, that's it. So where am I going with this? If this was Summer who was in the ring footage on October 29th, these interviews, even her mea culpa, after the kids were found, because she was like, I know some of you just want me to say I was wrong. So here it is. I'm saying it. I was wrong. We couldn't have possibly anticipated this. All of these interviews, everything. Like now, if that was her in the ring doorbell footage, it just begs, like, she was one more person who was there when the kids were gone and had been gone for some time, who did nothing. She would have, again, I'm not going to keep saying if this was her. I've already established that. But if it was her, she would have come back to Arizona knowing full well the kids were gone. There were, at that point, I think by the 29th, I think I'll have to double check this. But I think by the 29th, they had put like the kids' bikes in the storage unit. I think maybe not. I'm not exactly sure about that. But clearly, whoever that was, and I believe it was Summer, would have been there with both of the kids missing. And you'll notice Summer, she never admits to being there. So she doesn't say, like, hey, yeah, I was there. But Lori said that JJ was with Kay. In fact, she says, hey, this whole thing is Kay's doing. She was just trying to get custody of JJ, and she should have handled that, not use the police to try to make that happen. So nothing, in her claims support this, she was actually there. So there's a really significant disconnect in all of the claims, right down to her post after the kids' remains were confirmed, that would have indicated that, like, yeah, she was there. She, like, yeah, this made sense. You know what? When I was there in October, come to think of it, I didn't see either of the kids. I mean, Tylee was her niece. Even if she was at BYU a mile up the street, it wouldn't have made sense that she would have gotten together with Tylee, even if Lori didn't want to. Why wouldn't she have reached out to Tylee? Hey, Ty, let's go to lunch. Let's go to dinner. Let's catch up. And what about JJ? Obviously, she wouldn't have been able, it wouldn't have been plausible for her to believe that JJ was at Kay's. So there just would have been no explanation. And once again, just by way of repetition, whoever was in that ring footage sure was acting like she didn't have a care in the world. So this wouldn't have been someone who flew out or came to Lori's and was like, whoa, there's something seriously wrong here. Because, come to think of it, no one has heard from JJ or Tylee. And, Lori has been saying these things about Tylee. Like, we know that in the spring, according to Melanie Gibb, that Lori had called Tylee a zombie, and Tylee had said, not me, mom, and all of these family members, like, there's one point where Janice had said, that she was confirming she hadn't seen any, big change in Lori. And she actually said she was taking care of JJ. And I thought it was so interesting that she's referencing her daughter, who also had a teen daughter. And Janice didn't say she was taking care of JJ and Tylee, because they knew she wasn't taking care of Tylee. Tylee was left at Alex's, and she was like, at one point she was like, Lori took her to Hawaii with her when she stayed with April Raymond. At one point, Tylee was in Texas. So, and then Tylee was at Alex's. So Tylee was all over the place and was left alone for at minimum weeks at a time. And but, more likely months. And so Janice, I thought it was interesting that Janice didn't say, yeah, she was taking care of her kids, or, she was taking care of Tylee and JJ. But it was like, no, she was taking care of JJ. Anyway, okay. So, all right, let me come back. Okay, so that's my presentation for tonight. Again, 4 mysteries that I think that the GPS data quite possibly shines some light on. And then I just have to just keep drilling down, just bringing it back, because, like, this case is so dark and it's so bizarre that at times we just have to be, like, brought back to, these were people who were in Lori's home, who, when one or both of the kids were missing, and not one of them ever so much as called in a welfare check even anonymously. And I've talked about this before. The Cox family is very gossipy, very, very gossipy. Even back in 2007, I remember Lori telling me about a big fight that she had with Summer, and they weren't talking at that time. I don't remember a lot of the details, but I just remember that there was something going on. Excuse me. And I was a total outsider, and so here is this very gossipy family. We know that Colby, according to his interview with Keith Morrison, was that with Keith? Yeah, that he had, well, we know from his interview with Dr. Phil that 4 days after Tylee's birthday, they had a text exchange where he was really pushing for Tylee to call him, that he wanted to talk to her. But then in his interview with Keith Morrison, he actually added, all I need is 10 seconds. And so I just keep pounding the drum. Like, you don't say all I need is 10 seconds because you just want to catch up with your sister. At that point, he wanted to confirm that she was alive, and he never got that call. But then right after he said that, that's when the Venmos just started flowing. And I already covered that in the live with Colby. So, here you have these family members who they're all connected. They had to be talking. They had to be sharing notes. The Kay's family, the same thing. No one reached across even the aisle to, like, even if Kay didn't like Colby, Colby didn't like Kay, the Kay and her entourage are doing this investigation into Colby, find out, he has Charles' truck. And, and she had said, like, oh, Charles, had been paying their rent, for their devices, groceries, baby supplies, all of this stuff. So clearly there was animosity. It was like the Hatfields and McCoys almost between the Vallow family and the Cox family. And yet, like, no one reached across the aisle, like, okay, let's just put aside our differences. Has anyone confirmed any kind of contact with Tylee or JJ? It's just like, just across the board, either people weren't talking to each other or information wasn't being passed on to police. Like, we know that, even I covered this in another live, but when Kay found the Amazon purchase, what she passed on to Detective Moffat was not that Lori bought a wedding dress and a wedding ring and wedding accoutrement and, like, a male's, like, white outfit and all of these things. Those came out later in interviews, but at the time, what she passed on to Detective Moffat was just that Lori was doing these searches. So that meant that she also didn't pass on that she had Lori's address, and so there just weren't. And I'm just trying to present agnostic facts, and it just so happened that all of these facts just enabled the kids to fall between the cracks. Really, the main point of this live is all of the people who we know were with Lori after Tylee and or JJ were missing, who encouraged Lori's murderous fantasies, like Zulema, again, that second Nephi 10:2, the day before JJ was murdered, or we can at least say hours before JJ was murdered. And this was, her preparation. I mean, it's just like, again and again, like, these aren't just facts that have no consequence. The consequence of some of these facts are really significant, because if the kids had been found earlier, like if anyone would have done a welfare check when there were these growing concerns, because even like Kay, when she talked about because she was passing on this information to Detective Moffat, when she talked about Tammy being shot at, she said in one interview, they're killing everyone along the way. And so, I mean, that was October, that was around October. We don't know when she and Brandon had this conversation. She just said that Brandon called her after, one of the Tammy incidents. And she was like, oh my gosh, they're killing everyone along the way, so anyway, so, all right, that's the presentation. All right, I am going to take a few minutes for questions, and then I'm going to call it a night. My voice is shot. Okay, again, if you have a question, it's really helpful to put question in all caps. Don't write the whole question in all caps, but just put the word question in all caps. Even if you asked a question earlier in the live, I'm just not going to scroll back, 2+ hours. However long this was, to look for questions. I'm going to look for a few minutes, and then if I don't find any, I'm going to bounce. And let me just say, I mean, I've said this before, I do read through the chat, and the only bummer about doing these, well, one, the content, but then, because I'm so focused on the presentation, I don't get to interact with you guys, but I do read them, and I do appreciate the kind words. That's not an invitation for people to write more kind words, but they do touch me. Okay, so I haven't found any questions yet, so we might be able to call this a night. I'll just scroll to the most recent. Okay, Sandwillow asks, okay, we've seen Zulema's police interview. Was anything redacted from that interview? Not that we know of. I mean, if they did, the video would have just been spliced. Down the rabbit holes asked, do you think Melanie, there's one I, so this is Melanie Pawlowski, will be, it just moved, but I think she said arrested. Yeah, no, I don't. I talked about this in the last slide. There just really doesn't seem to be any inclination to go after these people who were most likely co-conspirators. Again, not trained in law enforcement, but some of these things, it's just like, at absolute minimum, they were enablers. Melanie, hey, you might want to get life insurance on JJ and Tylee, and and Zulema with her weird comments. Melanie Gibb is very much protected in these FOIA docs. I've talked about that before. I even saw this week where they had a list of these group members, and I think this was 2 different times. They referred to Melanie as Phoebe because that was like her name from another probation. And so it's just like, and then there are other times where they, like everyone else, they referred to the first name and then the last name, and they'll redact the last name, even unless it's like Alex Cox. They'll redact the last name, even when it's really, really obvious. Like and sometimes even the first and last name. Like one time they redacted Zach Cox, but then said in parentheses unredacted Adam's son. So it's like okay, and Zach Cox fits in the redaction. Although in the Gilbert police report they always spelled Zach's name wrong. They spelled it with an H, but even at one point they left it unredacted and it had an H at least once. But anyway, so so Melanie Gibb is very protected. Like they'll refer to, she's the only one I've seen where sometimes they will refer only to her last name. So they won't include Melanie, but then they'll redact Gibb. and it's the only name that fits in there. So they'll either just refer to her by her last name. They don't do this with anyone else. And then they redact the last name. So obviously, if you're searching the document for Melanie, it won't come up. And then, but when I saw, like, it was like, Chad, Lori, Alex, whoever, Phoebe, I'm just like, what in the world? So now I'm going to do searches for Phoebe. But anyway, and I talked about this last week. It really seems like they also protect then Melanie Boudreaux in the police report about Brandon's shooting. Like, even so, going so far as to say, while she was in Rexburg with Lori, Chad, and Alex, like, yeah, Lori, Chad, and Alex were preparing for the shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. And it's like, well, what was Melanie doing? So yeah, I hope I would love to see these other players face some kind of consequence for their participation in, like helping Lori, helping Chad. Like I've talked about this before, 2 days before Charles was shot and killed, here's Melanie Gibb insisting, like she told Lori she wanted to come over. Lori was like, all my family is here and the kids, it's chaos. And Melanie was like, okay, well, tell me when they leave, and then Lori blows her off because she just found out about this intervention and she's like, absolutely manic and does not care about hanging out with Melanie Gibb. And then Melanie Gibb actually drives to her house and waits outside on the street. So she's parked in her car and is like, I'm here, and then Lori's like, okay, well, you can come back if you're quiet, and which is just so weird. Like, who talks to another adult like that? But Melanie's like, okay. And she goes back. And we know from the timeline that Lori was on the phone with Chad at that time. So that's why Melanie needed to be quiet. And then Melanie spent the night, so and then she said that Lori told her she needed to leave the next morning because Charles was going to kill Lori. But then supposedly Melanie didn't know that Charles had been killed she told Nate Eaton 4 days, but in the when she was interviewed by Gilbert police, she said she didn't find out for 5 days. So again, Melanie can't keep her stories straight. But like all of this is just so absolutely bizarre. Like if your friend supposedly said you need to leave because Charles is going to shoot me, and you just don't follow up with your friend to be like, hey, are you okay? Like, I mean, it's, these people are not sophisticated in their lives. But yeah, I don't have hope that they will be charged with anything. Okay. Let's see, anything else? Someone asked, Alpha Femme X-Teen asked, where are we at with the petition for Joe? We're close to 10,000 signatures. So, I talked about this in the last live. Do I really think that Phoenix Police cares about this petition? No, but I do hope that, that there's, if you've watched enough true crime, that there are times where law enforcement, either because of laziness, lack of passion, they don't think that the case can be prosecuted, or they just don't care. They don't, or maybe there isn't enough evidence, or they don't find the evidence. They don't put, the pieces together. But then at some point later on, someone comes along who has, like fire in his or her belly, and it's like, what? All these deaths, we need to review the death of the first person, and, people have said, oh, well, they don't have, any, they don't have any evidence. They do. They took slides. They took a sample of 2 different organs. So they do have that. And depending on which cell carrier he had, some of these cell carriers maintain the data, I believe, up to 10 years. I did a post about this in Cool Cats. So, and at one point, it was in one of these police reports, they actually said, like, one of the investigators was like, we need to look into the death of Joseph Ryan, so, and they included it in the list. I think this was someone from the FBI included it in the list of suspicious deaths. So it's not like they're like, no, this couldn't possibly have happened. And I did a whole live about, some of the indicators in his apartment of possible foul play. And this isn't just me advocating for Joe. Like, I took an objective look at the pictures in, from the welfare check, because a reporter had passed them on to me. And I shared some of them in Cool Cats, not the really graphic ones, but Janice has seen everything I've seen, So anyway, there are, even from the pictures that I shared in Cool Cats, there are a number of indicators of, potential foul play. It looked like he was packing for a trip, and he had a girl's backpack and an iPad case. An iPad was charging by the front door, and there was an iPad case that looked like definitely like a kid's, like a girl's iPad case, and just a number of things. Like, the thermostat was set at one temperature. I think it was like 74 degrees. Excuse me. This was in April in Arizona, so it would have gotten, pretty hot. And, so the air conditioner was on at 74, but the window in his room was open. There are just a number of indicators. So the purpose of this petition is that, over time, hopefully it will just continue to accrue signatures and send a message. There's no harm, no foul. It can't do any harm, but to just send a message like, yeah, Phoenix police, like, I think you're asleep at the wheel on this one. Or just wishful thinking. I think Phoenix police was like, all this publicity, we don't want anything to do with this. But the detective who had inherited his file, not his case, and when they said, like, people who aren't very savvy about like PR and even true crime, they'll say, oh no, they did an investigation. They determined it was that he died of natural causes. No, they didn't do an investigation. They were very careful to say they did a review, and they published that press release the same day. I think it was the same day that I think it was confirmed that Joe Biden was president. It was a really big news day, which, again, I'm not alleging that their PR department did this on purpose to bury the story, but I used to be a reporter, and that is a tactic that is used to bury a story. Everyone was talking about the election, and they're like, oh, by the way, we did a review of the case, and it was natural causes. Then I've also talked about the ME. It says right in the ME report, they didn't open him up. The entire cause of death was based on an external examination. So basically looking at the body. Yeah, he looks like he died of a heart attack, and the medicines that he was taking. And another ME who I had talked with before we both were on the Nancy Grace podcast had said, wait a minute, they didn't they didn't do an internal examination. Not they, he didn't do an internal examination. And I said, no, it was based on an external examination. He said, then the cause of death shouldn't have been ruled at all. It should have been ruled as unknown. So anyway, okay. I'll look for one more and then I'm going to call it a night. Let's see. Salt Phone asked, how can Zulema be so delusional and insane and have, I think she meant limited use immunity? She will get taken apart on the stand, worst witness of all time, as is Melanie Gibb. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a coin toss. The difference between Zulema and Melanie Gibb, from what we know, now there are tens of thousands of pages of documentation in Idaho that we haven't seen because Idaho doesn't release documents through the Freedom of Information Act before the trial. So they'll release them after the trial. So they could have, potentially, I'm sure that there may be evidence that Zulema can bring to the table that is solid enough that even though she is no Girl Scout, she lied repeatedly, at least to Gilbert police. Now, we don't know if she lied to Rob Wood or to Phoenix police, but that would be a violation of her limited use immunity. But I do suspect that they need Zulema's testimony to push the date of conspiracy back to October 2018 for both of the kids and for Tammy. So Tammy dates back to October 1st. The kids, to do harm to the kids, was October 26th. So that would have been the day that Chad and Lori met. So I suspect that they need her testimony. With Melanie Gibb, she doesn't have a limited use immunity agreement. She was asked under oath if she, had like some kind of, I think it was immunity, if she had been offered immunity in exchange for her testimony. She said no. Excuse me. And if they had given her any kind of immunity deal, I'm sure they would have put a gag order on it. Like, one of the conditions for it is you can't talk to the media. And she went on a media tour because at that point, she felt so confident that she was going to be able to come through this, somewhat of a hero. She even talked about reaching out to Tammy's sister and how it was comforting to Tammy's sister to talk to someone who was close to these people. And I'm like, wow, that is guts. Like, you are reaching out to a family member and offering comfort when, even when she was asked about Tammy, she was like, no, I didn't know how Tammy was supposed to die. And then this was with Nate. And then she was like, oh, I think I heard a few times that she was supposed to die by car accident. It's like, really? So you discussed this or were part of discussion about Tammy dying. This is after you already thought that Tylee was dead. You obviously had grave concerns about JJ's welfare. You knew Lori was lying. You knew that, according to your own statements, that Al came and got JJ because he was acting like a zombie and was out of control, instead of, oh, JJ's at school, like, I was like, no, he's with creepy Uncle Al. And, but with Melanie, the one thing that she brings to the table, and I do believe that they will both be shredded on cross, but the one thing that we know that Melanie brings to the table is the recording. So Melanie can be complicit. She can be creepy. She can lie. Well, she shouldn't, but is she going to be held accountable for lying? I don't think so. I think they're just so focused on going after the big fish that it's like, oh, we just have to, the ends justify the means. But with her, she has that recording. She has, Lori and Chad on a recording. And I think the two most damaging things from that recording, I've talked about this before in other lives. With Lori, it was her statement that not even Alex knows where JJ is. And then with Chad, him making a statement of how Tammy died and how, his kids were there and all this stuff, which contradicted his previous claim about how Tammy died. So he's going to be like fed to the vultures for that in Tammy's trial. But so that's what Melanie brings to the table. We don't know what Zulema brings to the table that's of any evidentiary value. But anyway, okay, on that note, yes, we will see you next week. And thanks for joining me on another live. Good night.